The email came at 3:47 a.m. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Your attendance is optional. Optional. I built this company from my garage, worked 18-hour days for 3 years, and my own business partner just called my attendance optional to a meeting about my own company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I knew something was wrong when Veronica stopped answering my calls last week, when the financial reports suddenly became confidential, when she hired that expensive law firm without telling me. But seeing those words on my phone screen, lying in bed after another sleepless night, that's when I knew she was coming for everything I'd built. I started DevStream Solutions in my garage in Portland 3 years ago. Back then, it was just me, a secondhand laptop, and an idea for software that could streamline data processing for small businesses. I'd been laid off from my tech job at a startup that burned through venture capital faster than teenagers spend allowance money. While my former colleagues were sending out resumes, I was building something real. The early days were brutal. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and coffee, coding 16 hours a day, sleeping on an air mattress I'd moved into the garage because I couldn't afford both rent and server costs. My savings account hit zero twice. I maxed out 2 credit cards and borrowed $8,000 from my retirement fund. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, DevStream started working. Our first client was Martinez Auto Repair down the street. Old Mr. Martinez had been tracking inventory on paper since 1987 and was drowning in paperwork. I built him a simple system for $300. He was so happy he told his brother, who told his cousin, who told his business partner. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients and was making enough to move back into an actual apartment. That's when I met Veronica Chen at a networking event for women entrepreneurs. She was polished in a way I wasn't, with an MBA from Stanford and connections at every major bank in the Pacific Northwest. She wore designer blazers while I was still shopping at thrift stores. When she offered to come on as a business partner to help scale DevStream, I thought I'd won the lottery. Veronica brought legitimacy. She had the vocabulary for talking to investors, the network for finding bigger clients, and the confidence to walk into boardrooms where I still felt like an imposter. Our partnership agreement was 50-50. Equal shares, equal say, equal ownership. She helped me incorporate properly, set up real accounting systems, and land our first enterprise client, a construction company with 200 employees. Within a year, we'd grown from 12 clients to 87. Revenue jumped from $30,000 to $420,000 annually. We hired our first employees, Jessica and Raj, both brilliant developers who believed in our vision. We moved into real office space in downtown Portland. Nothing fancy, but it had windows and didn't smell like motor oil. I finally bought clothes that fit properly and could afford to eat somewhere other than the food truck outside our building. But success changed Veronica. Or maybe it revealed who she'd always been. She started making decisions without consulting me. Small things at first. She'd schedule client meetings and forget to include me. She'd approve marketing expenses I'd never seen. When I asked about it, she'd smile and say she was just trying to be efficient, that we needed to move fast in this competitive market. The first real warning sign came 8 months ago when I discovered she'd hired her college roommate, Madison, as our director of strategic operations at a salary of $95,000. I found out when Madison showed up to our office with her own key and started rearranging the conference room. I pulled her aside immediately. We'd never discussed hiring anyone at that level, and we certainly couldn't afford that salary without discussing it first. Veronica just shrugged and said Madison had incredible experience at a consulting firm in Seattle, that we needed someone with her skills to take us to the next level. When I pointed out that we'd never talked about it, her tone turned cold. "Emma, you're brilliant with the technical side, but you don't understand business development like I do. Madison's hire will pay for itself within 3 months." She was wrong. Madison spent most of her time reorganizing filing systems and creating PowerPoint presentations about synergistic optimization strategies that meant absolutely nothing. But by then, she was embedded in our company culture, attending every meeting, weighing in on decisions she didn't understand. The second warning sign was subtler, but more disturbing. I started noticing that client communications were being routed through Veronica's email instead of our shared company account. When I asked about it, she explained that several clients had specifically requested to work directly with her because of her strategic background. It made sense on the surface, but something felt off. These were clients I'd landed personally, relationships I'd built from scratch. I decided to reach out to a few of them directly, just casual check-ins to see how they were feeling about our services. That's when I discovered that 3 of our biggest clients thought I was just a contractor Veronica had hired. They had no idea I was the founder and majority developer of the software they were using every day. One of them, David Kim from Northwest Manufacturing, actually said, "Veronica mentioned you might be leaving soon. I hope whoever replaces you can maintain the same quality." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. How had clients gotten the impression I was leaving? Why did they think Veronica was the primary contact for everything? I pulled up our partnership agreement and read through it carefully for the first time in months. Everything looked standard: 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making authority, standard dissolution clauses. But then I started digging deeper into our corporate filings. I accessed our state business registration portal and downloaded our most recent annual report. What I saw made my stomach drop. According to the official documents filed 3 months ago, Veronica Chen was listed as Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder with 51% ownership. I was listed as Chief Technical Officer with 49%. I'd never signed anything agreeing to that change. I'd never even been told about it. I called our lawyer immediately, but his office said he was now exclusively representing Veronica's interest and suggested I find independent counsel. The same lawyer who had helped us set up our partnership agreement, who'd filed our original incorporation papers, was now telling me he couldn't speak to me about my own company. That weekend, I hired Rebecca Santos, a corporate attorney who specialized in partnership disputes. Rebecca reviewed everything: our original agreement, the recent filings, email communications, financial records. Her assessment was devastating. Veronica had been systematically repositioning herself as the primary owner and decision-maker through a series of small legal maneuvers and documentation changes. "She's been building a case that you're an employee, not a partner," Rebecca explained during our first meeting. "The email routing, the client communications, the organizational chart she filed with the state, it all supports a narrative that she's the business owner and you're the technical contractor." She showed me documents I'd never seen before, consulting agreements that portrayed my work as contract development rather than ownership activities, financial projections that minimized the value of my technical contributions while emphasizing Veronica's business development role, even performance reviews she'd apparently been conducting without my knowledge, documenting my limitations in strategic thinking and need for business mentorship. The most damning piece was a board resolution dated 2 months ago, signed by what appeared to be my signature, agreeing to restructure the ownership percentages and governance structure. I'd never seen this document before, let alone signed it. "This is fraud," I told Rebecca, studying the forged signature. "She's literally stealing my company." "Proving that will be challenging," Rebecca replied. "She's been methodical about creating documentation that supports her version of events. We need to be just as methodical about building our countercase." That's when I remembered the security cameras I'd installed in our office 6 months ago after someone broke into the building next door. They were motion activated and saved footage to a cloud server for 90 days. If Veronica had been in the office forging documents or having unauthorized meetings, there might be evidence. I spent the next week reviewing hundreds of hours of footage from the past 3 months. Most of it was routine: employees coming and going, normal meetings, late-night work sessions. But then I found something interesting: multiple recordings of Veronica meeting with Madison and 2 people I didn't recognize, always after hours when I wasn't there, always in the conference room with documents spread across the table. In one particularly clear recording from 3 weeks ago, I could see Veronica practicing my signature on a piece of paper, comparing it to what looked like legal documents, then practicing again. Madison was coaching her, pointing at specific parts of the signature and suggesting modifications. They did this for 47 minutes. I saved every frame of that footage and forwarded it to Rebecca immediately. The third piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Jessica, our lead developer, approached me privately on a Thursday afternoon. She looked nervous, checking over her shoulder before closing my office door. "Emma, I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid I might get fired." She sat down across from my desk, wrapping her hands around a coffee mug like it was an anchor. Veronica offered you my job last week. Jessica's words hit me like ice water. She offered you my job? I kept my voice steady, but my mind was racing. Tell me everything. Jessica glanced at the door again, then leaned forward. She called it a promotion to Chief Technology Officer, said you were moving into a consulting role to focus on new product development. She made it sound like your idea, like you wanted to step back from day-to-day operations. Jessica paused, studying my face. But something felt wrong about the whole conversation. She kept emphasizing how this needed to stay confidential until the transition was announced. What exactly did she say about me stepping back? That you'd realized you were better suited for high-level technical work than operational management. She said you'd expressed concerns about handling the business side as we scaled, that you wanted to focus on what you do best. Jessica shook her head. It didn't sound like you at all. You've never shown any interest in stepping back from running this company. I felt my chest tighten. Veronica wasn't just stealing my ownership, she was rewriting the narrative to make it look like my choice. Brilliant and devastating. Did she mention anything about equity or ownership changes? She said employee equity packages were being restructured as part of the growth phase, that everyone would benefit from the new structure. She made it sound like some kind of promotion for the whole team. Jessica frowned. Emma, you didn't agree to any of this, did you? Absolutely not. I stood up and walked to my window, looking down at the street below where people were going about their normal Thursday afternoon routines, completely unaware that my entire life was being systematically dismantled 3 floors above them. Jessica, I need you to do something for me, and it might seem strange. Anything. I need you to document every conversation you've had with Veronica about company structure, my role, equity, anything related to changes in management or ownership. Dates, times, who else was present, exact quotes if you remember them. I turned back to face her, and I need you to keep this conversation completely confidential. Jessica nodded immediately. Done. But Emma, there's something else. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. Veronica asked me to install monitoring software on the development servers last month. She said it was for security auditing, to track who was accessing what code and when. My blood went cold. You mean she's been tracking my access to my own company's systems? All of ours. Every file opened, every line of code modified, every database query. I thought it was weird, but she made it sound like standard practice for companies our size. Jessica looked genuinely distressed. I'm sorry, Emma. I should have asked you about it first. Show me. Jessica pulled up the monitoring dashboard on her laptop. The interface was sleek and comprehensive, tracking user activity across every aspect of our system. I scrolled through weeks of data, seeing my own work patterns laid out in granular detail. Every late-night coding session, every weekend spent debugging, every innovation I'd developed was documented and time-stamped. But then, more concerning was what else I saw. Access logs showing Veronica downloading source code repositories she had no technical reason to view. Database exports containing our complete client list, pricing models, and technical specifications. She'd been systematically copying our entire intellectual property portfolio. Jessica, when did you install this? October 15th? I grabbed a calendar from my desk. October 15th was 2 days after I had confronted Veronica about hiring Madison without discussing it with me. She'd started monitoring my access to my own company's systems immediately after our first real conflict. This wasn't a recent decision. It was a calculated response to me questioning her authority. I need you to download a complete copy of these logs and email them to me from your personal account. Can you do that without the system flagging it? I think so. The monitoring software doesn't track its own usage. Jessica was already typing. Emma, what's really going on here? I made a decision. Jessica deserved to know what she was walking into. Veronica is trying to push me out of the company I founded. She's been forging documents, manipulating client relationships, and apparently monitoring my every move to build a case that I'm not fit to run this business. Jessica's eyes widened.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That's insane. This company is your baby. Everyone knows that. Knowing it and proving it legally are two different things. She's been very careful to create documentation that supports her version of events. I sat back down, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered. The question is, what are you going to do with the information I just shared? Jessica didn't hesitate. Whatever you need me to do to stop her. That evening, I sat in my apartment with 3 laptops open, building what Rebecca had called my counter case. The security footage of Veronica practicing my signature, Jessica's documentation of unauthorized job offers and monitoring software, the access logs showing systematic theft of company data, and the forged board resolution that allegedly transferred majority ownership to her. But I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of her plan and who else was involved. Madison was obviously complicit, but Veronica couldn't have orchestrated this alone. Someone had helped her navigate the legal requirements, prepare the fraudulent documents, and develop the strategy for gradually marginalizing me. I decided to do something that felt like corporate espionage, but was technically accessing my own company's systems. Using administrative credentials I'd created when we first set up our infrastructure, I logged into our email server and began reviewing Veronica's sent messages from the past 6 months. What I found was a masterclass in strategic manipulation. Email threads with Madison discussing transition timelines and narrative management. Messages to our accountant requesting financial projections that excluded my salary, but included expensive executive compensation for Veronica. Communications with the law firm about restructuring corporate governance to reflect operational realities. But the most damaging emails were with someone named Richard Blackstone at Peninsula Capital Partners, a venture capital firm I'd never heard of. The messages revealed that Veronica had been secretly negotiating to sell DevStream to Peninsula for $12 million. According to the email thread, the deal was contingent on resolving current ownership disputes and ensuring stable executive leadership. Richard's latest message, sent just yesterday, was particularly revealing. Veronica, our due diligence team is satisfied with the technical assets and client portfolio. Once you've completed the ownership consolidation we discussed, we are prepared to move forward with the acquisition. The board meeting next week should finalize everything nicely. I stared at that message for a full minute, letting the implications sink in. Veronica wasn't just trying to push me out of my own company. She was planning to sell it to a venture capital firm for $12 million while I was completely excluded from the transaction. The emergency board meeting she'd called wasn't about company operations or strategic planning. It was the final step in legally transferring complete ownership to herself before completing the sale. I immediately forwarded every relevant email to my personal account and to Rebecca. Then I started researching Peninsula Capital Partners. Their website looked legitimate, with a portfolio of successful acquisitions in the tech sector. Richard Blackstone was listed as a managing partner with extensive experience in software company acquisitions. But something felt off about the timeline. Veronica had been communicating with Peninsula for months, yet she'd never mentioned exploring acquisition opportunities to me. As a 50% owner, I should have been involved in any discussions about selling the company from the very beginning. I called Rebecca's emergency line. "Emma, it's almost midnight," she answered groggily. "Veronica is selling our company to a venture capital firm for $12 million, and she's planning to complete the transaction after Monday's board meeting without my involvement or consent." Rebecca was suddenly very awake. "Send me everything you just found. I'll review it tonight and we'll meet first thing tomorrow morning." "There is more. I have evidence she's been systematically stealing our intellectual property and client data. She installed monitoring software to track my access to our own systems. And I have video footage of her forging my signature on legal documents." "Emma, This is no longer a partnership dispute. This is criminal fraud on a massive scale. Rebecca's voice was grim. We need to move fast. If she completes the sale, recovering your assets becomes exponentially more complicated. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything I'd discovered, organizing evidence into categories, and preparing a comprehensive timeline of Veronica's deception. By morning, I had 47 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud, theft, and conspiracy to deprive me of my ownership rights. But I also had a plan. Friday morning, Rebecca and I met at her office to develop our strategy. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. According to the corporate bylaws, both partners needed to be present for any vote regarding ownership changes or major business decisions, like acquisition offers. "She's counting on you not showing up," Rebecca explained. "The email calling your attendance as optional was designed to create documentation that you chose not to participate in corporate governance decisions. So, I show up. You show up prepared. We're going to file an emergency injunction this afternoon to prevent any ownership transfers or major business decisions until this matter can be properly adjudicated. We're also going to request a forensic audit of the company's financial records and computer systems. What about the sale to Peninsula Capital? If we can prove she doesn't have legal authority to sell the company, the acquisition agreement becomes void. Peninsula Capital thinks they're buying from the legitimate owner. When they discover they're dealing with someone who obtained ownership through fraud, they'll walk away immediately." That afternoon, Rebecca filed our emergency motion with the county court. The injunction was granted within hours, specifically prohibiting any changes to corporate ownership structure or major business decisions until our fraud allegations could be investigated. But we didn't stop there. Rebecca also contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division to report the identity theft, signature forgery, and theft of trade secrets. She filed complaints with the state attorney general's office regarding corporate fraud and with the state bar association regarding the lawyer who had helped Veronica file fraudulent documents. By Friday evening, Veronica's carefully constructed plan was beginning to unravel. But she didn't know it yet. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Portland in November. I dressed carefully in my best business suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for our first major client presentation 2 years ago. I wanted to look like the CEO I'd always been, not the contractor Veronica had tried to make me appear. I arrived at our office building 30 minutes early and positioned myself in the lobby coffee shop where I could see everyone who entered. Veronica arrived at 9:45 with Madison and 2 people I didn't know, probably representatives from Peninsula Capital. She looked confident, carrying a leather portfolio and checking her phone as they walked towards the elevators. She had no idea what was waiting for her upstairs. I waited until exactly 10 a.m. before taking the elevator to our office floor. Rebecca was already there, having arrived through the building's back entrance to avoid being seen. She had positioned herself in the conference room with 3 boxes of evidence and a court officer who would serve the injunction paperwork at the appropriate moment. When I walked through our office doors, the conversation in the conference room stopped abruptly. Through the glass walls, I could see Veronica's expression shift from confusion to alarm. She clearly didn't expect me to show up, despite this being a meeting about my own company. "Emma, I called out you wasn't sure you'd make it. We were just getting started with introductions."
I walked directly into the conference room without responding to her greeting. Madison was seated to Veronica's right, frantically shuffling through a stack of papers. Across from them sat 2 men in expensive suits, who I assumed were from Peninsula Capital. Everyone looked professionally composed except Veronica, whose confident demeanor was beginning to crack around the edges. "Before we begin," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table where I'd sat for every board meeting since founding this company, "I'd like to introduce my attorney, Rebecca Santos, who will be observing today's proceedings." The color started draining from Veronica's face. One of the men from Peninsula Capital, a silver-haired gentleman who introduced himself as Richard Blackstone, looked between us with growing confusion. "I'm sorry," Richard said, "but I was under the impression this was a straightforward ownership transition meeting. Veronica mentioned that all corporate governance issues had been resolved." "That's an interesting characterization," I replied calmly.
Veronica, would you like to explain to Mr. Blackstone exactly how these corporate governance issues were resolved? Veronica's hands were trembling slightly as she opened her portfolio. Emma, I think there's been some confusion. We discussed your transition to a consulting role several weeks ago. The documentation we filed simply reflects the operational structure we agreed upon. Show me that documentation. She slid a folder across the table containing the forged board resolution that supposedly transferred majority ownership to her. I opened it and pretended to study the signature. I knew she'd practiced copying from our security footage. "This is fascinating," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Rebecca, could you please show everyone what we discovered about this particular document?" Rebecca opened her laptop and projected the security camera footage onto the conference room's wall display. The video showed Veronica and Madison in this exact room 3 weeks ago, with Veronica practicing my signature while Madison coached her on the specific curves and angles. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard Blackstone's face went from confusion to horror as he watched Veronica forge legal documents on the conference room table. His colleague was taking notes furiously, probably calculating how quickly they could distance Peninsula Capital from this situation. "That's not what it looks like," Veronica stammered, but her voice had lost all authority. "We were just practicing for a presentation about signing procedures." "Really?" I opened my own laptop and began displaying the evidence Rebecca and I had compiled. "Let's see what other presentations you were working on." The next slide showed the email correspondence between Veronica and Peninsula Capital, including Richard's message about completing the ownership consolidation before finalizing the $12 million acquisition. Richard's face flushed red as his own words appeared on the screen. "Mr. Blackstone," I said, maintaining eye contact with him, "were you aware that the person trying to sell you this company obtained majority ownership through identity theft and signature forgery?" "Absolutely not," Richard responded immediately, standing up from his chair. "Peninsula Capital conducts thorough due diligence on all ownership claims. If these allegations are accurate, this acquisition is terminated immediately." He turned to his colleague. "Call our legal team. We need to withdraw from this transaction and review our exposure." But I wasn't finished. The next series of slides showed the monitoring software Veronica had installed to track my access to our own systems, the systematic theft of our intellectual property, and the client communications where she'd positioned herself as the primary owner while portraying me as a contractor. With each new piece of evidence, Veronica sank deeper into her chair. Madison had stopped taking notes and was staring at the table, probably wondering if she was criminally liable for her participation in this scheme. "Emma, I think there's been some confusion." Veronica tried one last time. "I'm taking all of this out of context. I was trying to protect the company's interests during a period of rapid growth. By stealing my identity and selling my company without my knowledge or consent?" I kept my voice level, professional. "Veronica, you've committed at least 7 felonies in the process of protecting the company's interests." That's when Rebecca stood up and nodded to the court officer, who stepped forward with an official envelope. "Veronica Chen, you're being served with an emergency injunction prohibiting any changes to corporate ownership or major business decisions, pending investigation of fraud allegations. You're also being served with a lawsuit for identity theft, signature forgery, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Veronica went completely pale, not just nervous or embarrassed, but the kind of pale that happens when someone realizes their entire world is collapsing in real time. Her hands were shaking as she took the legal documents, and I could see sweat forming on her forehead, despite the conference room being comfortably cool. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "Emma, we can work this out privately. There's no need for all this legal drama." "The time for working things out privately ended when you forged my signature and tried to sell my company," I replied. "Veronica, please show everyone the last piece of evidence." The last slide contains screenshots from Veronica's email account, including her communications with our former lawyer about creating documentation to support the narrative that I was an employee rather than an owner.
messages discussing how to gradually marginalize my role in company operations, plans for timing the ownership transfer to coincide with the Peninsula Capital acquisition. Richard Blackstone was gathering his papers with obvious disgust. Miss Chen, Peninsula Capital will be conducting our own investigation into this matter. If we determine that you misrepresented material facts during our due diligence process, we'll be pursuing legal remedies for fraud and misrepresentation. Wait, Veronica said desperately. The acquisition can still move forward. Emma and I can work out our partnership issues separately. The company is still valuable. The company is valuable, I agreed. But you don't own it. You never owned it. And you certainly don't have the authority to sell it. Madison finally spoke up, her voice barely audible. Veronica, you told me Emma had agreed to all of this. You said she wanted to focus on technical work and step back from management. I never agreed to anything, I said firmly. Madison, you might want to consider getting your own attorney. Conspiracy to commit fraud carries serious criminal penalties. The Peninsula Capital representatives left immediately, making it clear they wanted no further association with Veronica or this transaction. Madison followed them out, mumbling something about needing to make phone calls. Within minutes, the conference room was empty except for Veronica, Rebecca, the court officer, and me. Veronica sat alone at the conference table, staring at the legal documents in her hands. For someone who'd been so confident in her manipulation and planning, she looked completely lost. Emma, I never meant it for it to go this far. I thought I was helping the company grow. By stealing it from me? By providing the business leadership you didn't want to handle. Her voice was getting stronger again, falling back into the manipulation patterns that had gotten her this far. You're brilliant technically, but you don't understand strategic planning or investor relations. I understood them well enough to build this company from nothing, while you were still networking at Stanford alumni events. The difference is I built something real instead of just talking about building things. Rebecca interrupted our conversation.
Emma, we should go. The court officer needs to escort Miss Chen from the premises, and you have other matters to attend to. As we walked toward the conference room door, Veronica called after me one last time. This won't end here, Emma. You can't prove I intended to defraud anyone. My lawyer will appeal the injunction. I turned back to face her. Veronica, your lawyer is the one who helped you file fraudulent corporate documents. He's currently being investigated by the State Bar Association for professional misconduct. You might want to find new representation. The look of realization that crossed her face was almost pitiful. She'd been so focused on executing her plan that she hadn't considered what would happen when it unraveled. Every person she'd relied on, every system she'd manipulated, every document she'd forged was now evidence against her. Rebecca and I left Veronica sitting alone in the conference room with a court officer and 3 boxes of evidence documenting her systematic betrayal. As we walked back to the elevators, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete ownership of my own life and work. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and business reconstruction. The story of a female entrepreneur fighting back against corporate fraud resonated with tech industry publications and business journals. Several reporters called Veronica's scheme one of the most sophisticated examples of partnership fraud they'd encountered. Peninsula Capital withdrew completely from any acquisition discussions, but 3 other firms reached out expressing interest in DevStream. Now that the ownership structure was clear and the fraud allegations were public, legitimate investors wanted to partner with someone who'd fought so hard to protect their company. Jessica and Raj stayed with the company, both receiving significant equity increases in recognition of their loyalty during the crisis. We hired a new business development director, someone with actual experience rather than just connections and MBA vocabulary. Our client base grew by 30% within 6 months as word spread about our software quality and business integrity. Veronica faced criminal charges for identity theft, signature forgery, and theft of trade secrets. Madison cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, providing detailed testimony about Veronica's planning and execution of the fraud scheme. The lawyer who'd helped file fraudulent documents lost his license and faced his own criminal prosecution. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't legal or financial. It was personal.
For the first time since starting DevStream, I felt completely secure in the ownership of something I'd built with my own hands and mind. No one could take it from me because I'd proven I was strong enough to defend it. 6 months after that conference room confrontation, I was featured on the cover of Pacific Northwest Business Magazine with the headline, "The CEO Who Fought Back." The article detailed how I'd uncovered and defeated a sophisticated fraud scheme while building a successful software company. In the photo, I'm standing in our expanded office space, surrounded by our growing team of developers and support staff. I'm wearing this same navy blue suit I wore to the board meeting, but this time I'm smiling with genuine confidence rather than defensive determination. Because I'd learned something valuable during those months of fighting for my company. I wasn't just technically brilliant or operationally capable. I was strong enough to stand up to people who tried to steal from me, smart enough to gather evidence against sophisticated manipulation, and courageous enough to risk everything to protect what I built. Veronica thought she could push me out of my own company because I seemed too focused on technical work to understand business dynamics. She was wrong. I understood her manipulation perfectly well. I just also understood that real business is built on trust, integrity, and actual value creation rather than manipulation and fraud. The door I'd walked through that Monday morning led me back to complete ownership of my life's work. And this time, I was keeping the key. 1 year later, I received an unexpected email. Veronica had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $200,000 in restitution. Her lawyer had been disbarred and faced his own criminal prosecution. Madison received probation and community service after cooperating with federal investigators. But that wasn't why I was smiling as I read the news. I was smiling because DevStream Solutions had just been acquired by Meridian Tech for $18 million, $6 million more than Peninsula Capital had originally offered. The difference was that this time I negotiated the deal myself, kept controlling interest, and ensured our team received substantial equity payouts. Jessica became our Chief Technology Officer, leading a development team of 12 engineers. Raj now heads our West Coast expansion, managing client relationships across 3 states. We have grown from that tiny garage operation to a company with 43 employees and offices in Portland, Seattle, and Denver. The acquisition allowed me to launch something I dreamed about since those early ramen-eating days in my garage. The DevStream Foundation provides grants and mentorship to women starting technology companies. We've funded 8 startups so far, all founded by women who faced similar challenges breaking into the tech industry. Last month, I spoke at a conference for women entrepreneurs. During the question and answer session, a young developer asked how she'd found the courage to fight back against someone who seemed so much more connected and powerful than me. I told her the truth. Courage wasn't something I found, it was something I built. Every time I chose to gather evidence instead of giving up, every time I refused to accept someone else's version of my story, every time I stood up for what I knew was right, I got a little stronger. Veronica thought she could rewrite my history and steal my future because she underestimated who I really was. She saw someone too focused on technical details to understand business manipulation. She was wrong. I understood her manipulation perfectly well. I just refused to be intimidated by it. The best revenge wasn't seeing her go to prison or lose everything she'd stolen. The best revenge was building something so successful that her betrayal became irrelevant. DevStream Solutions thrived not because of her business connections or strategic planning, but because we created software that actually solved problems for real people. Sometimes I drive past our old office building and remember that Monday morning when I walked into a conference room not knowing if I'd walk out still owning my own company. I remember how my hands shook as I opened my laptop to display evidence of fraud, how Veronica's face went pale when she realized her entire scheme was collapsing. But mostly I remember the moment I decided to fight back instead of walking away. That decision changed everything, not just for my company, but for who I became as a person. I learned that protecting what you've built isn't just about legal documents or corporate structures. It's about knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. Today, when people ask me about that experience, I tell them it taught me the most important business lesson of my career. Success isn't about having the right connections or the smoothest sales pitch. Success is about creating real value and having the strength to defend it when someone tries to take it away. The garage I started DevStream Solutions in is now rented by another entrepreneur, a young woman building her own software company. I stopped by last week to drop off some old equipment we were donating. She was exactly where I had been 4 years ago, surrounded by laptops and caffeine, working 18-hour days to build something meaningful. I didn't tell her my story, but I left her my business card with a note. When you're ready to scale, call me. Some of us remember what it was like to start with nothing but an idea and determination. Because that's what real business relationships look like. Not people who forge your signature and steal your intellectual property, but people who remember their own struggles and choose to help instead of exploit. Veronica taught me something valuable, even though she didn't mean to. She taught me that the difference between victims and survivors isn't what happens to you, it's what you choose to do about it. I chose to gather evidence, fight back, and rebuild stronger than before. That choice made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.